Good morning, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Yesterday, I did a video, and I also had the supporting article on my website regarding taking module code. So you've coded a form to have a certain behavior, to have certain events, to do certain things, and take that from a module level and instead convert it over to a class module that you can then initiate on any form. So instead of copying the code form to form to form, which is a lot of code and then it's a lot of code to maintain, instead we convert it over to a class module that we only have to initiate. But now we have a single module or modules with the code that we can maintain much easier. And it guarantees the same behavior on any form that uses that class module. That said, I just, in the bottom of my stomach, it keeps bothering me. I get the feeling that for someone that's just starting off, perhaps that was a little bit much to absorb, especially when we threw in on top of the form subclassing, we also got into, in that specific scenario, button subclassing. Today, I thought I'd step back a little bit and really do a 101 class on form subclassing specifically. So I'm not going to get into then adding buttons and other components at this point in time. That'll come in a later video. But I just wanted to just step back for those that really aren't familiar with subclassing at all. You know, yesterday may have been a little bit much to absorb. You guys can always comment and tell me, no, it was fine, which I'd love to know one way or another. But today I just wanted to go back to the basics. So what I've done here is I've created 4 sets of forms and I've created 4 classes that go with them. So form 4 goes with class 4. The plain form goes with form 2 goes with form. It's pretty self-explanatory. And for some of these classes, we also then needed a standard module that I use for certain helper functions. So let's dive in. Basically, it's almost the same database as I used in my previous video. So you have a very simple bogus table. It makes no difference. The only difference in this scenario is I added a date of birth field to have a date time field just to be able to demonstrate something. And the form itself, you'll see, is the same form we had in the other video. I do modify it, I believe, when I'm doing class 4 to include the date of birth. I believe it's in that one there. So what is form subclassing? Well, what it is the form itself is a class of its own. Well, we're going to create a class within that. So that's why you call it subclassing. And why are we doing this is, as I explained earlier, it allows us to have a single place for our code that then gets pushed out, subclassed out to any form in which we initialize it and use it. So for demonstration purposes, what I've done here is, if we look at the code, you'll see here, all I have here is an open and a close. I come in the second one, open and close. I come to the third one, open and close. If you pay attention to them, however, they are all slightly different. Okay, this one has a footer. This one I put a header with a different color, no footer. So minute changes. It's basically still the same form tied to the same data. Nothing there changes. And they have no code within them. If you go and take a look at any of these 2 events, all of the 3 forms are identical. Let me just bring the code window over to you. So all 3 forms use the exact same code, and the code simply initializes this class module. We're going to look at that in detail in a second. But the beauty of the class module, we're not going to save any changes here, is that now if I open them, look at what's happened to them. Now, is that what I had here? There's no form header, there's no form footer, and yet here they are. And then I open my second one and look at that, it matches. And my third one, it also matches. Remember, this one had a huge header, but it was this yellowish green color. And yet here it's blue, and it's the exact same size and the same blue as the other forms. Same thing down here. So how am I achieving that? The class module. So let's just take a quick glance here at the first class module. We're going to be building upon it slowly. So what is it, the first class module? So a bare bones class module for subclassing a form would look something like this. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to declare a module level or a class module level object variable that represents the form that's calling it. And the first thing we do is we do a set listener, because that's my class here, call for the class form. So I'm going to use, for that class, I'm going to call the set of pform where I'm passing it the variable me, which is the current form that's calling it. So if we're on this one here, form I, it's going to pass form I to this. When I open this one, it's going to instead pass form II to this class. And if I come to this guy here, it's going to class III. And that's how they're distinguished. They're entities on their own. And that's how we're able to call the same class multiple times in the same session, but they're distinct because we're differentiating them based on the form that's calling them. So the first thing that does, let's step back, was this guy here. We're going to take my class, we're going to use the property pform, and we're going to set it to me. So we come here, the set pform, and we're passing it the variable of the form, which then comes here, is used to set our module level object variable. So basically with this, I'm setting up that this class now has identified and understands that it's working under the form oForm, which is whichever form called it. So right now it would be form I calling it. Then the next step I do is I'm going to call my sub, my function, whatever I want it to be. In this case, it's an initialization routine. And I'm using it to set up my different sections of my form. You can do anything you want. But just to show you, this is one way that you can go about standardizing all your forms. So now I've set my header to be true. I want it visible. I set a standard height for it. I've set a standard back color for it. I've done the same for the detail section, set a back color. And my footer I've set up as well with standard sizes. Obviously, if you're not familiar with setting any of these different dimensions, don't forget you always have to multiply by that 1440 TWIP conversion to take inches over to TWIPs. But that's basically it. So this guy here automatically gets run whenever you do the set pform. So I'm at the form opening calling the pform. So it is automatically running this initial setup routine that changes colors, changes size, and standardizes all my forms. The beauty with this is I can change one entry and one line in a class module, and now all of my associated forms have instantaneously changed. See, I haven't changed anything in my forms. All I had to do was change one entry in my class module, and all three forms instantaneously got updated. So that's where the power of class forms comes in. And then the last thing we do when we close down our form is we shut down the listener, we do our house cleaning, and similarly in our class module, we're going to do a class terminate, where we're going to do a form is equal to nothing, so just more spring cleaning. So this is more or less the most bare-boned version you could possibly have. We're going to now build upon this very basic scenario and take it a little bit further. So the next example, if we just open the first one, now let's open the second one, is now I've moved my button. Okay, I've moved my button from here. and I now moved it down here. You'll also notice here the labels were white, the background, and they're this light gray, which I absolutely detest. It's not very legible. For a lot of people, this is a horrible color. I don't know why it's Microsoft's default color. So you're going to also notice here, I got rid of the white. I've made them black to make them contrast, to make them much easier to read. So let's take a look. How did I achieve that? Because once again, let's get rid of this. We open this up. We look, we only have those two events. We still have that light gray here. We still have a white background. The button is, if you notice, on the left side, yet when we open it, it isn't. So let's go back to the code. You will notice the code is unchanged in the form. It does the exact same thing as previously. It simply initializes by setting pform. So nothing in the form ever changes, and you're going to see that. Nothing in any of these really changes. We simply have the set, and we have our listener to clean up at the end. But there's no extra code. I'm not doing anything there. It's all in the form. Now, you're in the class, should I say. Now, you're going to notice here, here. Originally, I was calling class form. Now we're in the second example. I've moved on to using class form 2. Okay. So now we're going to switch over here. Now, the basic principle is still the same. So we have our module level form variable. I have my set, which calls my class init. I also have a get. We have our terminate, and then I have an event. Okay, so what have I done? The get allows us to retrieve the name of the form or whatever relating to the form if we need it. In this case, strictly speaking, we don't need it. If I comment that out, you will see that the class operates just fine, okay? I'm just putting it there, so you have it. Sometimes we need this when we're doing other subclassing of controls. So that's why it's there just to demonstrate, but we strictly speaking don't need it. Then the set you're already familiar with, so it's going to initialize our module level variable, passing it the form that called it. Then we do this initialization. So what have I done this time differently than the previous version? Well, for starters, we're going to be playing around with some of the controls. As I said, I'm going to change the background from white to transparent. I'm going to change the font color. So we're going to be playing around with some controls. So I'm going to iterate through the controls. So I'm going to need this control variable. Then to be able to change some of these properties and to make coding a little bit more comprehensive and comprehensible, I create a few constants. I've commented some out. They're there as reference just to illustrate that you could have different values. But basically, I'm going to use this here, changing the back style of certain controls to transparent, and the border style also to transparent, because some of them have a dash border that I didn't particularly like. Next, well, then I got into the same thing as before, but you'll notice now I'm being more intelligent about my coding. And I say that because the simple fact is, in my initial version, I just threw this code at it and it works, right? But what happens in the event that a form doesn't have a header or a footer? Well, then this would bomb, this would error, okay? This is also where error handling becomes very important. Here it's all simplified. I don't have error handling to keep the code to a minimum for discussion purposes, but per the usual, you should always have the error handling. So to avoid this issue, this is where my first helper function comes in. I have a helper function right here, which can simply validate if a section exists or not. And it's very simple. You pass it a form and the section you're interested in, it's going to try to check if it's visible. If this property exists, it's because the section exists. Everything's glorious, so it's going to come through to true. If this doesn't, it's going to cause an error, which means it's going to come here and it's going to just exit quietly without ever passing over the true. So it's going to remain false. So it's just a simple way of validating if a certain section exists in a form. So that's what I do here. Before trying to apply and change properties, I make sure it exists. Then we do the exact same thing we had seen previously. I change visibility, sizes, back colors, etc., etc. And then the real fun comes here. Now I'm going to play around this time with some controls. So I come here and I look at my controls, and I'm going to iterate over all of my controls. So I'm going to do a for each control. Then I'm going to look at the type of control. And here you're going to see here, I differentiate command buttons and labels. And you can do any type of control you want. And then I'm going to come here and I'm going to go control name. If it's my save close control button specifically, so I'm targeting only one button, then I'm going to position it. I'm going to make it be in the middle of that footer. So it's always going to be in the middle, regardless if I come here and I change this height. It will always be perfectly in the middle. And then I also put it to the left, and I'm going to demonstrate something about this in one moment. And I add a small little buffer from the edge. I don't like my buttons right on the edge. I like them offset just a little bit. Don't forget that 1440. It's very important, or else you won't be getting the effect you're after. And then at the label level, I'm checking, because this form was special. It came from Microsoft, and some of them were required and they're red. I didn't want to mess with that. I didn't want to turn them all black. So I've made this thing to make sure that it doesn't include the word required. So therefore, it doesn't need to be red. Everything else I'm putting to black fonts. I'm changing the back style to transparent, and I'm removing the dash border, just making the border transparent. So by doing that, we end up with this. So this stays red because I made that exception. My labels now no longer have a white background, it's transparent. And the dash border is also gone. I don't know if we could really see the dash border, but there is a dash border around this. But you'll see, that's the writing is now black, right? There's no white background, and the border has been gone. And that button has been shifted from here over to here. Now I wanted to demonstrate something. Now this has to do with just understanding and being aware of different properties with forms. But initially, my left dimension, I was using the form width, okay? If we change that, and now instead of using my form width, I'm using the form inside width. Now look at where the button gets aligned. So you have the choice. So the form actually, its width is somewhere around here. That's why previously it was here. But the form inside width is the full width inside the MIDI client here. So therefore it's all the way over here. So just demonstrating to you once again the power of a class module. I made one change, and every single form that this class is applied to would instantaneously have shifted their button over like that. So you can get the look and feel and standardize throughout your entire application very simply using class modules. You can change the fonts, font sizes, bold, italic, colors. You get the general idea here. You can really customize and control your entire application from just a couple lines of code, rather than having to go into each separate form and make design changes and code changes. It's very tedious. This is a lot simpler to maintain. Okay, so we looked at the second case. Now let's build even further upon that. Now let's open this guy up. And let's go take a look at the code. What has happened here? Well, I don't know if you noticed, but the navigation is no longer available to me. I can't do anything. I'm locked in here. So let's go into design view. Once again, we know that at the code level, nothing's changed. Okay. Let's get rid of that for 2 seconds. We have the exact same code, except this time I added also an on current. We're going to see why in a second. And all it's doing is it's reporting to the immediate window when that code ran. You'll also notice now I'm using the class number 3. So let's go to class form 3. And here there's been a big change. Pay attention to our initial declaration. Up until now, we were doing a private form, right? Private O form, which is an access form. This time, however, I've added the with events. Now, this is a critical aspect to understand at this point in time. Up until now, all we've done is play around aesthetically with the actual form, okay? We subclass the form just to be able to modify the look and feel, but we haven't attempted to do anything at an event level. We haven't tried to use VBA class to add functionality in the sense of add events to it. And we can, and that truly is where the power of all this comes, is we can. So we can come here, and as long as we put this modifier, the with events modifier, now we have the permission, the ability to now add events to our form. Any event we want, on current, on open, on close, on unload, load, dirty, any event that you can do in a normal module through your form, through your data property sheet, you can now do through your class module, which just takes it up to a whole other level. We have our same properties as before, calling an initialization routine. We have the same general idea here. You'll notice this time, just for fun, I've come and I threw in a modal true. So I made the form modal through the class. So I don't even need to change that property anymore either. And then we have the same routine that we had previously for aligning, changing the background, the border, things like that, and my class terminate. Notice how I have done two things. Let's start with the first case scenario. So the first case, I'm now going to come here and I'm going to say form onCurrent. So I'm creating an onCurrent event for that form. Now don't forget, that form has an onCurrent event, okay? I am now setting the onCurrent event to some procedure, which is in my mod helpers. So I created a routine here, and all it does is it once again debug prints out to the immediate window, just to tell us that the procedure ran, okay? Let's see what happens. We're not going to save changes. We run it. Let's go back to our VBA, and you will see the class init ran. Okay, so I added a debug print at the top, and the sum from procedure ran. Let's step back for a second to our code. I already had an event here. I had a form current event, yet it's not here anywhere to be found. So you need to understand the way this works. I have effectively, by using this class, overwritten the event procedure and substituted it out to call this function instead. So this is where you have to be careful with class modules, because you can effectively overwrite behavior that you wanted, okay, unintentionally, but you can end up doing that. So to demonstrate now, let's clear that out. Let's comment this out. Let's take the different approach. Let's instead use our class module to do the onCurrent, yes. But this time, instead of calling a function, we're going to say, no, it's an event procedure. And down here, I then create that event procedure. I do the form underscore current, noticing I'm using the variable here that I have declared here with events, because that's what represents my form. So that's why if you look at the actual form, right, you do a form underscore current. Well, we're doing a form underscore current. And then I'm doing my debug, form current ran. Okay. So now instead of calling a function, a procedure, I'm calling an event procedure, which I've created below here. Now let's take a look at the change in behavior. Let's go back to our VBA window. And now look at this. My class init ran properly, okay. My form current event ran, and then followed by my form current, my class event, then ran. So now you see the difference. This guy overwrote the event procedure that was there by default. But by going through an event procedure, they can build one on top of the other. So it depends what you're trying to achieve as a behavior. You may want to add in some type of check, because you can, before you attribute values to them, you can read and check what their current value is. So you could do an if form on current equals, and you could check, does it have an equal sign at the beginning? If it does, then I don't want to overwrite it. If it doesn't, it's an event procedure. I want to use an event procedure. There's logic here that you have to build upon depending on what you're wanting to achieve. But just be aware of this, because it's the type of thing that can really nip you in the butt, and you may not understand why and what's going on. It may take you a bit of time to figure out. And it's just as simple as that, is you can effectively overwrite whatever is coded here in your module depending on the approach you take here in your class module. So that's basically the third example. Let's go now and take a look at the fourth example. What have I done here? Well, as you can see, as I had mentioned earlier, now I've added an extra field. I've added in my date of birth. And let's take a look here for a second at the form. You're going to see here in the code, it's the exact same thing. Let's clear this guy out. So no surprises there. At the form level, I want you to pay attention to one important thing. I don't have a format. And yet, if we open it up, I have two different distinct formats being displayed here for the same value. And I can also tell you my regional settings are not set to either of these formats. So where is this coming from? Well, once again, that's the beauty of using a class module. So if we come in here, you're going to be very familiar with all of this already. So we're using with events again. We've got our get and our set. We're calling our class init. So let's look at this class init. We're just building upon the previous version. So all of this you should already be familiar with. All of this all makes sense. Now let's come down. My button makes sense. My label makes sense. Here we go. Now I'm getting into, I've added now, we're going to go through my text boxes. And what am I doing? Well, I'm going to come here and I'm going to take a look at applying different formats depending on the data type. So this was a simplified approach where I looked at the control source, I looked at the type, and from there, let's take a look at it, and looked at the data type as long as it was directly associated to a field, that control source. And if it was a date, I applied my db date format. Now what is db date? db date is a global level variable that I declare. So this typically can be in a module, yes. I typically actually make this part of a configuration form that is based off of a table. Obviously, some of my users can actually control this. So I have a form, they can go and change the format to whatever they want, and I simply read it into memory at runtime when the database opens, and then I'm able to reference it wherever I need to. For this example, I hard-coded it. So I did a date format using ISO, and I did a date time with just a small variation just to differentiate. So what I'm doing here is if my control is directly bound to a field, I'm looking at the type of field, and if it's a date field, I'm applying my db date format. So if you look at it, you'll see it applies here. And I'm getting my ISO date format. You'll notice here now, I'm back to my default format that my system is configured, my regional settings. I've lost that previous formatting that we saw initially. Why is that? Because as I said, it has to be linked directly to the field. So this one is, it's straight to the field. This one is not, it's an expression, right? Equals, and it could be anything. So I wanted to get around that. It was still bothering me. I still want to be able to format these. And that's where I then came up and ended up doing the second version, where I now, instead of using directly the control source, instead, and this is another very powerful tool to use in database development, now I started using the tag. So here I put format date, here I put format date time, and you can go and create as many formats as you want for different things, currencies, numbers, whatever you need to format, phone numbers, email address, you can go wild here. And now I'm getting the tag from the control, and I'm extracting the format that's been specified. How am I doing that? Well, once again, a helper function. So this is available on my website. I have a whole article about it, but I have this parse string, and it extracts whatever component I want. By default, I separate them with the pipe. That can all be configured. As you can see here, you can control the different delimiters. But long story short, this guy is able to read and extract values from tags in my usage scenarios. So it's going to come, it's going to look at the tag, it's going to extract the value of the format entry, and then it's going to simply run a case statement based on whatever it extracted. And if I say, give me the date, then it puts it as the date format. If it's a date time format, then it sets it to DB date time format, and you can go on with currency, etc., etc. So with this simple little routine, I can now control and standardize the formatting of any text box I want, or any other control too. You can get into controlling other formats too, but typically it's going to be text box. So now I can control the formatting of dates and times, currencies, numbers. Just the sky's the limit here throughout my entire database in one location, in one call. Sorry, wrong button. There we go. So if you see, I now am back to having them set up, my date time, my date. And if you see here, I had set this as is hyperlink, and it changes the cursor, as you can see. And like I'm saying to you, it makes it very easy now, because now I can just come back here, and in one change, I now, throughout my entire database, have changed the format of any date time value. And if that isn't what you want, then it's no big deal. You can come here and you can enter whatever you'd like. If that's the format that you like, then that's the format you get. And that's the beauty of classes. Like I say, using subclassing of forms is an extremely powerful tool. Something I wished I had learned much earlier on in my development career. Just to mention, this is also a great time where I would be adding, probably an open event or something along those lines, in which I would be validating, for instance, security. Does the user have the permissions to be opening the current form? Class module is great for applying security throughout your entire application. That way, all the code is centralized and easy to manage. So as you can see, you can subclass it just for aesthetics. You can subclass it to add functionality. So we get into events. And you also get the subclassing here where you're doing controls, but to add other elements to it. The formatting is a great one. You could do validation too if you wanted. You want to create certain input masks. All these different things you can do at the class level, and then it's pushed out automatically to all your forms. And it's as simple as this to set up and run on any form. And like I said, as you saw, you can then control so all your forms are identically laid out and set up in color schemes and themes and all of this stuff, and truly make your database uniform, standardized, and your users are going to find it much easier. Well, that's pretty much my intro, my Class 101 on Class Modules Form SubClassing in Microsoft Access. I hope this was a little bit clearer than yesterday's video, truly focusing just at the form level. Future videos, we're going to get back into subclassing other elements of forms and reports, but this is a great intro, I believe, and I hope this clarifies anything that wasn't 100% clear in yesterday's video. Well, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to wish you all a great day, and thank you for spending your time with me. As per the usual, I greatly appreciate it. If you don't mind, like, share, subscribe. Have a great day.